We are living in an era of unprecedented uncertainty. There are so many devices scattered throughout the enterprise network. It is challenging for security professionals to keep pace with demands. Of late, large scale disruptions and the cost of ransomware operations illustrate the growing impact of cyber threat activity on enterprise risk across all industry segments. Now, virtualization in the cloud and the advance of internet connected devices do ease the burden on industrial systems, but these technologies are also introducing new vulnerabilities and risks. Even a global pandemic can't stop cyber criminals. If anything, the vulnerability and uncertainty has become a breeding ground for new attacks. According to an Accenture study, there were on average 270 attacks, including unauthorized access of data, applications, services, networks, or devices per company over the course of a year. Now, that is an increase of 31% compared with 2020. Cyber attacks are spiraling upward even as security investments rise, and security's relationship with cloud continues to prove challenging. Now, the report further states that more than half of large companies are not effectively stopping cyber attacks, finding and fixing breaching swiftly, or reducing the impact of breaches. But it is important for organizations to focus on cyber resilience. The cyber resilient business brings together the capabilities of cybersecurity, business continuity, and enterprise resilience. It embeds security across the business ecosystem and applies fluid security strategies to respond quickly to threats so it can minimize the damage and continue to operate under attack. As we have seen in this report, organizations that focus solely on business growth are missing out on the benefits of cyber resilience, and there are gains for those organizations that proactively seek out a strong synergistic alignment between security and the business. By aligning their cybersecurity efforts with the business strategy, organizations can not only achieve better business outcomes, but also seize an advantage in the race to cyber resilience. In an annual survey by Accenture, 4744 global respondents talked about the current state of cybersecurity resilience, and it was found 85% of CISOs agree that the cybersecurity strategy is developed with business objectives such as growth or market share in mind. Leadership across sectors is now highly invested in cyber resiliency. There's a willingness to put more focus on it, owing to its importance in ensuring business continuity. It's a conversation that's happening right now, and in this webinar, we intend to focus on building cyber resilience with security with our panel of industry leaders. Well, on that note, let us begin the introductions. My name is Gautam Srinivas, and I'm your host for the session. And today we have with us Anand Chaudhary, GM for IT at Merino Industries, Dr. Balvinder Sodhi, Assistant Professor, Department of Computer Science and Engineering at IIT Ropar, Abhijit Singh Anand, Founder and CEO at Zindagi Technologies, and Alok Khandelwal, Lead for Accenture Security at Accenture's Advanced Technology Centers. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for a conversation which is highly relevant and important in today's time, which is building cyber resiliency. So, Alok, we'll start with you. As I mentioned about the study, which showed that more than 50% of large enterprises are unable to stop cyber attacks effectively or reduce the impact of breaches. Now, in this scenario, how important does the role of cyber resilience become? And when it comes to different levels of cyber resilience, I believe there are 4. Could you elaborate on what those levels are for our audience so that we can set the stage for a broader understanding around this theme of cyber resilience?
Thank you, Gautam, and thank you for the wonderful introduction to the report and setting the stage for this conversation. I wanted to start off with highlighting the subtle difference between cybersecurity and cyber resilience. And the fact is that cyber resilience continues to operate even after the adversary has penetrated the security perimeter of your network. As security professionals, we all know that it is unlikely we can prevent attacks from happening. But when they do take place, you can actually identify that they've taken place. You can actually make sure that you prevent them from escalating within the organization, and also make sure that enterprises are able to recover with minimal loss. And that's really where cyber resilience comes into action. So the measure of success of cybersecurity in any company is not really in terms of the number of cyber attacks that happen or do not happen, but it's about the culture of cyber resilience. And a very simple way to understand this is the current coronavirus epidemic. We know that the pandemic, we know that we are unable to actually prevent the origination of the virus, or in fact the mutation, but we are taking steps to build immunity and various practices that allow us to just be resistant as a human race to it. So cyber resilience is exactly the same way. You refer to the Accenture study, and I think we try to understand this better in terms of how organizations fit in the scale from a cyber resilience point of view. And we did a simple analysis around two primary factors. The first one is the strength of cybersecurity practices in the organization, or their cyber resilience or security posture. And the second aspect is around how well that is aligned with their business strategy. And if you put this in a two by two, on the top right hand quadrant, you will come up with the gold standard, which is what we call as the cybersecurity champions or the cyber champions. And these are organizations that have a very strong alignment of their cybersecurity practices and resilience with their business strategy. They stand out. And then you have three other types of organizations. You have business blockers who actually put cybersecurity ahead of their business strategy. And then you have the cyber risk takers who actually put business priorities or business strategy ahead of cyber risk strategy. And then you have the third quadrant, which is the vulnerables who are weak on both dimensions, on their cybersecurity posture as well as their business alignment, alignment to the business strategy. But it's not about where you fall in the quadrant. There is an implication to where you stand in the quadrant, which is the financial impact. Because depending on where you are, the cost of a breach is different. And if you're a cybersecurity champion, the cost of a breach is actually 50% less compared to where you might be in the rest of the quadrant. And that really is the implication of cyber resilience. So just a way to understand the importance of cyber resilience and how you could plot organizations based on their security posture and alignment with business strategy.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And as you grow, of course, resilience, cyber resilience enables you to gain trust within the organization and outside the organization, which in turn leads to new innovation coming in, new models operating for you to generate money. And as you say, when it comes to the ROI question, when it comes to security, if you are a cyber champion, if you stand to optimize your cost by 50%, I'm sure that is a statistic which would gain the attention of the viewing audience. But let's expand on some of the themes that you have mentioned, and I want to look at how collaboratively an organization can work from the first hand to see how cyber resilience can be built when everyone works together. So Anand, let me bring you into this conversation, with your rich experience in documenting, implementing and maintaining standards, policies, procedures and security systems for IT infrastructures. Which functions do you think should collaborate to ensure the best success in hitting security milestones? And what, according to you, are the critical skills required to execute cybersecurity team responsibilities?
Cross team collaboration has a huge potential to unlock the success. And the collaboration between the project management, between the business, between the management is very important. And as you see, the industry is very dynamic in nature nowadays. We are introducing new services. We are refreshing our old services, old applications day to day. And the data security, which is being led by an information security team, they need to collaborate with the business functions very well. And business, they should make aware the business, the risk, what is there in case there is a data breach. What are the risks which can appear, and it should be transparently to be known to the management, to the business, the kind of data security posture or the security tools which we have implemented in the organization. Should be well aware of the same, and we should be transparent. If we don't have the capacity to safeguard our application, we should first of all give them a transparent idea that we should first have an implementation of security first. And therefore the collaboration with the business and the project management team is very important, what I feel with respect to the information security.
All right. Let's also try to get a better understanding of the landscape, since in the previous 2 years we've seen digital transformation efforts, which would take years, they compressed into months. So let's understand what the security landscape is and what the ground realities are. Dr. Sodhi, I'll bring you in for this. Why are cyber attacks becoming rampant in the post-pandemic era? How potent is the threat of new ransomware models? Your thoughts on this?
Sure. Thank you, Gautam, for having me on the panel today. Uh, the pandemic has actually brought us into slightly different way of look at most organizations, especially remote working. The model of remote working that most organizations, small to medium, and I guess across the board, they are sort of forced to now suddenly shift gears and let the employees work remotely. And now there are various factors that emerge. Okay. First is that employees working remotely are sort of less supervised, so to say. So there may be a temptation sort of to indulge in some sort of insecure cyber behavior as they use the IT infrastructure of the organization. Secondly, which is in my view a little bit more important, the cyber criminals realize that the IT setup is not purpose fit for this sort of remote working for many organizations, and they want to exploit that, right? And so that has been a major cause, and many studies actually cite this as a major reason. And then another related thing is smaller companies, especially smaller organizations, they allow this bring your own device model rather than corporate issued devices, which tend to be more securely controlled and managed and updated, etc. So at that level, you see this specific scenario of the pandemic has caused a little bit of a more frequency of attacks. Now, coming to the second question that you put, that why the threat of, how potent is the threat of the new ransomware models? See, ransomware sort of, if we recall, evolved from just encrypt. Somebody clicks a phishing link, perhaps, right? Through that vector, you download some malware, it encrypts your hard disk and flashes a message. Okay, deposit some money and we'll decrypt it, etc., etc. So that was a sort of I would say, low value sort of stuff. Now, with lot of businesses adopting, digitization of their business processes and a lot of other factors, the value of information has increased a lot. A lot of organizations are holding data, which is probably intellectual property, private customers' data, and a lot of other data which has value. And now, on top of it, there are regulations which have become more stringent in terms of penalties. There are data-related rights of consumers and so on. So the risk for an organization for any breach has increased. And that's what an attacker wants to capitalize when they want to have a ransom given to you. So they are adopting newer ways. They spend months actually to actually execute a sophisticated attack. And they're not just leaving the data encrypted in your disk within your network. They're actually taking it out. That in case you don't comply with the demands, they're going to make certain private information public. And that may have legal implications and a lot of regulatory penalties and so on. So the risk is quite high.
And is there a difference in the nature of how organizations respond, Dr. Sodhi? Because we have digital natives and we have, say, large enterprises who are migrating to a digital future. So in a sense, you would assume digital natives are more prepared. Is that the case? Or
it seems so that the digital natives, they usually take adequate measures more than somebody who is, let's say, just adopting the digitization. So they're more at risk, I would say.
All right. Let's expand on some of the points that Dr. Sodhi has brought up, and Abhijit, I'll bring you in, considering how the landscape stands. We are now entering an era where the attacks are getting more sophisticated, considering what the value is brought to the table as everyone is digitizing, and you always stay updated with the latest technology trends as well as their business ramifications. So, any cybersecurity predictions that you'd like to share for 2022? Where do we go from here?
Well, thank you for your question, Gautam. At Zindagi, our expectations of the future are based on the trends that we see now. So these are trends related to attacker behaviors, technologies, workplace trends, and in general laws and regulations. So I'll stick my neck out. I'll make three predictions or forecasts. I think the first one is that we are about to see in the 2022 a post-COVID security cleanup. What I mean by that is that the pandemic forced companies to transform their business models practically overnight. A lot of technologies, an entire kitchen sink of technology was by a lot of organizations so that they could sustain their operations, so that they could keep their lights up, they could let their employees remain connected remotely. Now, in many cases, the move was so quick and that a lot of security concerns weren't properly addressed. And CISOs now, in my opinion, are focused on the cleanup, but they can only move so fast. I believe that we'll see a significant fallout of in the coming months in the form of security incidents caused by cloud misconfigurations, application misconfigurations, giving excessive rights to people to not require those many rights, and the excessive use of shadow IT. That's number one. Number two, I believe, adding to what Dr. was saying, that I think ransomware will continue its upward, not only with the extortion increase, I think even the tactics will change. The business model for ransomware is, I think, too lucrative for these threat actors to stop doing what they're doing. I expect that we'll see new ransomware. We will see new variants of existing ransomware targeting both data at rest as well as data in motion. In 2022, I think that these threat actors will try new tactics such as recruiting insiders within the victim's organization. So that's, I think, the second trend I think that we will see. The third one is related. The third one is actually zero trust. Zero trust is actually a buzzword right now. I see all boardroom conversations using zero trust. I think it's a concept of least privilege access that's caught on recently. And if you apply it to the concept of insider threat, at one end of the spectrum, organizations have to defend against ransomware and insider threats. And on the other end of the organization, given that hybrid work is here to stay, organizations have to make sure that employees can get work done as safely as possible from wherever they are, and they have to ensure that all the endpoints are secure with continual checks in place. Now, that's where the concept of zero trust comes in, where every single organization will have to implement least privilege access, they'll have to implement microsegmentation, they'll have to implement threat hunting, and other such features. So I guess in 2022, with this whole Omicron thing not dying out, I think organizations have a lot to keep in mind. But remaining vigilant will enable them to defend against these upcoming threats and respond to those that eventually or inevitably get. I think that's what cyber resilience is all about.
All right, but Abhijit, over the past 2 years, we've also seen automation gain a lot of ground. So, in your sense, if we look at points 2 and 3, which is that new ransomware models will emerge, and if you could have someone on the inside working for you, but on the other hand, you also operate on a zero trust framework. So, what do you think will happen as automation picks up speed? Will it, say, mitigate some of these issues, or will it become an additional burden for CISOs?
See, the attack vectors keep changing, and the threat actors are always one step ahead of us. But the kind of work they've done with our customers in the past, what we have realized is, if we implement platforms such as SOAR, security orchestration and automation response, and integrate that with the global threat feed, and make sure that micro-segmentation is permeated throughout the interface with a software-defined working layer on top, it helps a lot in preventing zero-day vulnerability. So I believe definitely automation is going to play a very, very long role, apart from other factors such as education, implementing zero trust networks. Automation is definitely going to help.
All right, Alok, let me bring you in to respond to a point that Abhijit mentioned. Over the next 3 to 5 years, around 2/3 of the workload that's going to shift to the cloud. And while zero trust, as Abhijit mentioned, has entered the boardroom conversation, security overall is not getting the bandwidth that it should when it comes to being part of the cloud discussion for many organizations. So what needs to happen now?
Thanks, Gautam. And I think Abhijit made my job easier when he talked about the prediction about organizations and the pace of change that they've just gone through, and therefore a need for a bit of a cleanup. And that's exactly the context I wanted to set, that the pace of change in the market has been unprecedented. And it's been faster than decision making cycles, the time that organizations take to take decisions. Now, once organizations get their mind around the fact that cloud is the way to go, it actually allows them to be nimble and agile and run their business in the manner that they improve speed to market. There is a race to migrate to the cloud. You want to move your applications, you want to move your workload to the cloud. And then when you put in security in between, security is seen as a blocker, because when you start including security as an aspect, you start asking questions like, where will your data reside, where will your workload reside, who has access to it, what is the impact of multi-tenancy, when you put your data there. And that is seen as a blocker because it creates a perception that answers to these questions will actually require you to moderate the pace of change or migration to the cloud. But this is a misconception. And I think if you're leveraging security in the right way, it can actually be a business enabler and not a blocker. Because if you're migrating to the cloud, there are a lot of compliance requirements that you need to keep in place. And the security team is your best partner to be able to answer those requirements. As an example, let's say a manufacturer is launching a new car in the market. Would they launch it without a seat belt? The cost of launching a car without a seat belt is going to be much more than what you will actually make by selling the car. Right? So I think you need to look at security and your migration to the cloud from that perspective. And two things need to happen. One, you just need to make sure security is built in from the start and not coming in later, because it is actually an enabler. And I think secondly, the security team needs to step up, be more visible, keep up to the pace of change of the business, and be a part of it, which allows it to be much more integrated with the business transformation that the organizations go through.
But what about large enterprises? Look, we had this conversation with Dr. Sodhi, where digital natives, sure, they can do that. But for large enterprises with lots of disparate systems and who are looking to go more digital, that could create a problem for them. How do they resolve that when you need to rethink security as you digitize your operations, maybe across geographies, across verticals if they are conglomerates? How do they do that then?
Exactly, Gautam. And I think for large organizations, it actually gets compounded because you're actually trying to move from an existing condition to a new state. You've already got legacy infrastructure, you've got large investments that are already made, and then you're migrating. So in these situations, it becomes more important to assess where you are, understand your posture, actually build in security from the start, and then see what the implications are as you migrate to the cloud. So I would say it becomes more important for large organizations to think through this in advance.
All right. Anand, let me bring you in. Building on the points that Alok mentioned, what was your take on organizations getting the most out of the cloud without, say, jeopardizing their security? Whether it's a multi-cloud environment, hybrid cloud environment, your thoughts on this?
Especially for the mid-sized manufacturing companies, uh, people often believe that we are, after deploying a tool, antivirus or some other security tools, there is often belief that we have a security in the organization, and that makes the thing very comfortable in the organization, that we have tools running very fine and all, and there is no proper knowledge of the tool. What I see that when in terms of manufacturing, especially in manufacturing industry, the tools are deployed without having a full knowledge of the tool. And management and the business has this idea that we have the security in place. So what I am able to see that the key skill in terms of security, the proper knowledge, proper tool deployment, and the planning. The one of the very important part is that how we are planning the implementation, how we are coordinating with the business, and the importance to have the security plan in place is very, very critical.
All right. Dr. Sodhi, based on your experience, what could be the possible motivation for security incidents in cyber physical systems? Is it commercial vandalism, say, which is reduced output, or reputational vandalism, which is making a manufacturer untrusted or reliable, or are there other motives as well?
Actually, there is in fact a lot of work around this, that the motivational theory behind all of this. One of them is this rational actor model, which people use to sort of explain why somebody does certain actions. So at the core of it, it emerges from there. And the actual reasons, of course, both are there, as you said. In general, from a layman perspective, I would look at it. So financial, socio-political activism, so-called, right? Espionage, or it could be, plain nuisance or destruction. All of these could be valid reasons, actually, have been observed and documented in many surveys and studies. So ultimately, at the bottom of it, somebody sees kind of a value, right, for that individual who is carrying out an attack, right? So on behalf of that individual himself or herself who is trying to gain some monetary benefit, or just being seen as capable of having done something, or being able to do something. So these are the usual motivations.
All right. Abhijit, it is also interesting to note how differently security and non-security executives perceive security effectiveness, budget and risks of attack. What are your observations on this?
We see a dichotomy here, Gautam. I think at one side, this whole pandemic and the rising digitization has led to a huge surge in cyber crimes in the last 1 year. And on the flip side, a majority of CISOs and security buyers who I talk to are anticipating that their budgets will get truncated. Again, the root cause being the pandemic. Now, one possible explanation for this truncation could be that, given the economically difficult environment, corporate and non-executives, non-security executives and board members are not, they're closely examining the organization's finances, and as such, they're likely to make cuts in areas that don't appear to directly affect revenue. Now, prima facie, it may appear that cybersecurity doesn't correlate with the company's bottom line, but of course, that's not true. There was a very recent incident where a large financial institution had to pay $80 million or so to settle a cybersecurity breach. And as I think another panelist was saying, that apart from being costly, that it causes terrible damage to the organization's reputation. Here is how I try to address this conversation when I speak to C-level executives. I give a paradigm of cyber insurance, and that how cyber insurance is get pricier and harder to get. So given the complex, threatscape, requirements for affordable cybersecurity, coverage are going on expanding. And these insurance companies are giving discounts on premiums, and these discounts will increasingly be linked to the actions that these organizations take or fail to take to mitigate risks. So we expect that businesses will invest in their cybersecurity tools and processes, and to prove to these insurance providers that they're actually worth, taking the risk. At Zindagi, we believe that, the paradigm is changing. It's not about securing the business anymore. It's about enabling the business through security. Yeah, as you said, Gautam, that, security should be a boardroom conversation. And I believe that all these, the C-suite should have to understand that basic protections such as multi-factor authentications, doing the common things uncommonly well. Multi-factor authentication and, zero trust and patching and access controls are critical. And if not addressed, then cybercrime can pose an existential risk for that organization.
And it's good that the market is also responding, in the sense that, as you mentioned, if I have, say, a payment model which can be revised or cost can be mitigated, there are responses coming from, say, insurance providers to make sure that, that happens. But let's also understand the expectations that companies would now have from their security enablers as to what to do, whether they're working in-house or third party. What are the expectations before we move to the final leg of the conversation? Anand, your thoughts on that? What would be the expectations now from whether your in-house security team or whether with third-party partners when it comes to security implementation?
We as a manufacturing, we lack in the domain of the security. We always prefer a reliable partner in the industry who can guide us to evolve a new security issues which can be there with the business. And there are already standard services are already available. If you talk of SOC services, over the NOC, you build up a SOC service with the other service provider so that there is a cross check. So these tools are already available, and the partner, the alignment of these services are already available in the market. We in manufacturing, we always recommend to have a third party to be onboarded for these kind of requirements where we don't have a specialized skill sets. And in fact, nowadays, where we have a manufacturing, the OT platform, we are also looking beyond the IT security. We are looking on the OT, how we can implement the security on the OT platforms also. So this is one of the what you can say that we manufacturing may not have the idea of the proper tools and techniques to get the things remediated in terms of security, but we always go with a third party who premium vendors or tier one vendors, so that we can have the same kind of services what a big organizations take, right,
All
in
right.
terms of security.
Abhijit, your response, how do you see this relationship evolving? When we look at manufacturing spaces, there's more edge points, industrial IoT, a whole lot of things happening. So how do you see the relationship between the client and the service provider now evolve, especially when it comes to building cyber resiliency?
Oh, yes. So, I mean, when you look at the paradigm of OT security, I think the concept of security in IT has always been related to confidentiality. And when it comes to OT, it's about human safety and uptime, whether it is manufacturing or whether it's power, whether it's oil and natural gas. So up till now, security in the OT domain has been sidelined. But the way we're serving the entire spectrum of OEMs are focused on security. There are a lot of platforms which are talking to the sensors, to the actuators, to the PLC, HMI interfaces, getting that data, and then partnering with the customer, understanding their problems from an OT perspective, and then merging them with an IT perspective. So I think that partnership will definitely become very, very strong in the coming years.
All right. One other aspect, and I'll bring in Dr. Sodhi for this, is the skilling aspect. Dr. Sodhi, where are we in terms of making sure that the talent which is working on security solutions gets the best information when it comes to learning? So, in terms of learning and skill, where are we when it comes to building cyber resilience?
I think there is a great deal of effort, especially in the latest curricula that we see in most programs, academic programs. So definitely there has been due emphasis, in fact. And several institutions, I know IIT Kanpur has a very specific center of excellence for security, and they have been collaborating with other institutions. And here at IIT Roper also, we have got a very specialized group. So the inputs that come from those groups have been, I'm witnessing, incorporated into the curriculum, especially when you're looking at our fresh undergrads which are entering the industry who build these IT systems. So definitely, yes, there is more sensitization at that level. And of course, I think continuing education, also we are seeing an uptick. A lot of professionals, independent professionals, as well as organizations have been approaching us to impart very specialized kind of security training, especially when you look at the more proliferation of IoT as well as the AI-enabled systems, right? Where in general the human intervention tends to be a little bit less. So security angle becomes even more important in those systems. Another major thing I would like to highlight is today, in fact, recently I was reading another report. There is another trend people are observing, that the data is wealth actually today, right? We all understand. And the criminals, cyber criminals, are actually today and keeping it in the hope that, let's say, the data is encrypted with a really high-grade, military-grade encryption technologies, and it's made secure and everything. The hope is that within, let's say, next 5 to 10 years, when the quantum technologies, let's say, become a good reality in practice, they'll be able to decrypt all that and then monetize at that point of time. So whatever private information somebody is holding today, it's a matter of time that somebody is able to, with the use of improved technology, is able to get out of the secrecy and make it public. And again, the ransomware model we were talking earlier in the conversation. So these things are again being asked, that how do we deal with those things, right? So people are asking questions, training their manpower. And we at the institutions like IITs and other institutions, we are actually preparing the curriculum to equip our students to deal with these kind of threats.
Well, you brought up themes which are interesting to think about, because as you said, the attack which happened gains data to the malicious actor, but the malicious actor would say, if I'm unable to decrypt it, let's wait till the time I'm able to. So whether it's 256-bit, 512-bit, 128, 1028-bit, it's just a matter of time when, they are able to crack it and use that data for their own nefarious purposes. But speaking of where we stand, Alok, could you tell us what in your opinion, differentiates the cyber champions from other organizations? You mentioned about the quadrant, and we see many organizations still in the weaker side of the quadrant. How do they become cyber champions? And to take forward some of the points Dr. Sodhi had mentioned, can you throw some light on the demand of cyber security associated talent in the Indian market? And how is Accenture making a difference in this regard?
Sure, Gautam. And let me address the cyber champion point first in terms of how do organizations get there. And I'd like to quote a data point from the Accenture study that you mentioned, which is that the investment in cybersecurity in organizations is increasing year on year. It went up by 5% last year, and now it's approximately 15% of the IT budget in organizations. Now, that's substantial. But ironically, the number of cyber attacks each year continue to increase. And as you mentioned, it was 31, it's gone up by 31% from last year. And therefore, you have this dichotomy that you are actually spending more on cybersecurity, but the cyber incidents continue to increase. Now, that's an interesting point because what it says is it's not about the amount of money that you put in terms of cybersecurity. That's important as well. But it's really important that you're actually able to build in the cyber resilience so that the cost of breaches is reduced. And that's where every organization wants to become a cyber champion, because once you get there, the cost of a breach is significantly lower compared to where you might have been if you're not a cyber champion. So that's really important. And then, therefore, the question is, how do you get there? And at the heart of it, of course, is that you have to make sure there is a strong alignment between your cybersecurity and your business strategy. So a practical illustration of that is that CISOs have to be at the table, reporting directly to the CEOs or to the CFOs, and in some cases to the board as well. And we have examples of that in situations where that's happened. But what does that really translate to? I think organizations can visualize it from two dimensions, that if they've actually built a strong linkage of cybersecurity practices to their business strategy, look at it from a lens of what it means to the customer and the employees. For customers, you should be able to increase the value proposition to customers. Using the example that Abhijit mentioned, if you are actually putting in multi-factor authentication, can you ease password controls and improve the customer experience? Now, that is a decision you might reach at if you've actually integrated your cybersecurity very well with your customer experience strategy, which is driven by the business, right? So that's one illustration. Secondly, from an employee point of view, as Dr. Sodhi said earlier, a lot of organizations are allowing employees to bring their own devices. Now, what does that mean? It means that security is everybody's responsibility. So if you're bringing in new devices into the organization, make sure that you read their manuals and you're changing their default passwords. So security is really everybody's responsibility. You have to look at it from an employee lens as well. And you can drive that, if security is really sitting at the table with the business. So I say that as two illustrations of how you can really become cyber champions and, go down that path of really making sure you're mitigating the cost of breaches in the organization. A few thoughts on the talent point that you mentioned. And I think the talent imperative is not just from a cybersecurity perspective, but across the board. You need deep engineering talent. So it applies much more broadly in terms of the type of talent that you need, especially in cybersecurity. There is a shortage. There is much more work than you actually have people available to do it. And our approach in Accenture is to see how you can create that talent rather than try and consume it from the market. It's unlikely you will get the number of talented professionals you need. So a fair amount of investment in terms of creating it internally through a variety of training programs and experiential learning that we provide. At the same time, looking at the type of talent that you also intake. You may actually need engineers for some kinds of roles. You may actually need some more functional or business professionals for different kinds of roles. So we're really diversifying the intake as well, and really having programs to create the talent within the organization to address the shortfall.
All right, we're almost at the final leg of the conversation. So let's get in summary thoughts from everyone on the message that they would like the audience to take away from this discussion from their perspective. So Anand, we'll start with you. What's the key message that the audience should take away from your side when it comes to building cyber resilience?
First of all, the transparency with the business and transparency with the management about the current security posture is very important. Then only you can have the budgets. And as Alok told us that 55 more than 50% of the companies are in poor security posture, and there is a lack of talent. And obviously market is very dynamic. You are getting new products deployed every quarter. New applications are coming in the organization without having a proper security in place, especially in the manufacturing per se. So that is one of the very key important point, that having a proper knowledge of a tool, any tool which we are procuring, you should have the knowledge how you are going to get this tool implemented, the planning, and the mitigation in case there is some challenges, some issues which appear with this, or some kind of alerts which come, how you are going to mitigate. So you should have a proper planning, which is very important to get the cyber resilience in the picture.
All right. Plan for change, plan for security. That's the message from Anand. Dr. Sodhi, your message to the audience on the key takeaway on this theme of building cyber resilience from your side.
So I would say, firstly, I'm just echoing what Alok also mentioned. One has to look at this problem holistically. It's not just the cyber security perspective. The overall system level one has to look at, and even before that, one has to acknowledge that there is a threat, and don't be sitting ducks, right? You need to acknowledge that there is a potential of damage that can happen through your cyber systems. So once you acknowledge that, then you start thinking about strategies and putting in place the right mechanisms, be it in your, right at the level of development of software, right? Adopting the right practices, because ultimately it's the vulnerabilities in the software that gets exploited and that leads to eventually bigger breaches and all. So you start taking a holistic look at this whole thing. That's what I would say.
Acknowledge the gaps. That's a very important message. Plan for change, but first of all, acknowledge the gaps. Abhijit, your summary statement on what we have been discussing, the theme of cyber resilience. What's the key message that the audience should take away from your side?
I believe there are three portions of cyber resilience. One is to protect. Number one, protect your systems, protect your applications, protect your data. Second one is detect malicious activity, and you can only detect malicious activity when you have a baseline. So your first step, ab initio, has to be to start off with mapping your current systems, understand what is good behavior, understand what is anomalous behavior, so that when an attack does emanate, be it an insider threat or an outsider threat, you have the baseline in place that you can start protecting. So step one is protect, number two is detect, and the third one is evolve. So I think it should start off with mapping your current systems, your data, your application, your user behaviors.
All right. Protect, detect, and evolve. A crisp summarization of Abhijit's viewpoint on what you should take away from the theme of cyber resilience. Alok, let me come to you for the last word on this theme, on this discussion. Lots of points have been brought up, but what's the key message that you would like the audience to take away from this discussion?
Thanks, Gautam. And I think great takeaways from all the panelists. I would say we are in a world where cybersecurity is everybody's responsibility. We believe that every business is a technology business. And in such a scenario, it's no longer the responsibility of only the information security officer, but every user, the IT department, and all parts of the organization, starting from the board, they have to have the responsibility of building cyber resilience. So it's pervasive. Everybody has to contribute.
All right. Well, you can go far if you go together. Well, on that note, it's time to conclude this virtual session on cyber resilience. I hope we were able to answer some of the most pressing concerns for CISOs who are initiating or rethinking their security and risk strategies. I'd like to thank all the panelists for sharing their lessons and insights on the topic. And of course, thank you to our viewers for tuning in as well. Till next time, this is Gautam Srinivasan signing off. Have a great day.